because like you have
Alô, alô, alô. Começou já, alô. Deve ter começado já. Boa tarde, eu voltei. Fiz uma pausa aí rapidinho. Eu tô ouvindo podcast de fundo aqui enquanto eu faço show, então
like instant feedback,
fiquem de
like
olho.
they have access to the product straight away. Like with Kickstarter, you can sell a vision, and it is relatively low risk. It's like you can just do a really good job at selling something, and there's literally no delivery at that point when the money exchanges. But with early access, it is just like the entire, like a Kickstarter page or whatever crowdfunding sort of service you use. It's like you curate that page. You can say whatever you want. A Steam page is curated, but then it's like you have reviews of the game. You have, reviews on YouTube. Like you have this whole plethora of people and their opinion on the game that also colors like your entire perception of it. So if it sucks and you don't meet that vision, like you're just not going to get that money. Like that just never existed. You don't get that sale. But you can, explain a vision and sell it really well on a Kickstarter campaign, and then you will get the money. Even if you don't deliver later, you will still get the money to some extent. So there is just like, it's a lot more brutal, early access. However, if you treat it seriously, if you do actually deliver, then the ceiling is much higher. You can make a lot more money. You can be a lot more successful. It is just like a very brutal 1-to-1 ratio as far as exactly what you put in is exactly what you sort of get out.
Okay. What kind of, well, first off, are there any other negatives associated with early access that you can quickly think of? Like what are the risks? You mentioned a few just now, but can you think of any others? Like negative reviews, for example. It's like, I see you have reviews now. Do those reviews count as much as a normal review of a 1.0 launch?
Like honestly, I don't think it's like inherent negatives. Like the negatives just sort of amplify the negatives built into what you're doing. Like if you have a game and you have a trash update and it sucks, guess what? You'll get bad reviews. But if it's a fully released game, you'll also get bad reviews. But if it's early access, maybe you'll get even more. People tend to be a little bit like raw with their feedback, even though it's sort of counter to what you would sort of think. People would sort of usually like think, oh yeah, we'll give the early access game a little bit more sort of padding. Will be a little bit nice. Usually the people are pretty brutal. They don't change up their opinions based on the fact if it's early access or not. But like I don't think it's like inherently different. I just think like if you have a game and
opinião meio merda.
those flaws will be
Opinião meio merda. O cara que lançou jogando 3 milhões de dólares é uma opinião meio merda. Que engraçado.
If anything, it's a really good thing for those flaws to be exposed before development's finished. You release an early access, you find a big problem, get a bunch of feedback, fix the problem, and then a couple of years later you release the game and that problem does not exist in the final product. But if you sort of worked on it completely internally and then released it at a later stage, you might ship the final game with that same problem that people gave feedback on. So it's just like
Eu acho que não.
So Julian, when you launch when you launch Lens Island, you're doing the 1.0 launch in December, right?
Yeah.
Okay. When you launch it, do all those early access reviews get wiped clean? Do they count?
No, they all count. Yeah.
Okay. So that to me is the risk. If you launch something that sucks, but you know it's not going to suck when you launch 1.0. The negative side is if you're getting like mixed reviews, it's going to be potentially hard to combat those when you launch, because you're going to have a game that already has mixed reviews. Even though 1.0 might be amazing, you're stuck with those mixed reviews, right?
Well, I think it's all based on like ratios, right? I think the only time that that's really going to matter, where you're stuck with a bunch of negative reviews and that basically forever ruins your ratio and you have a hard time coming back from that, is if you're Amazon and you have unlimited marketing budget and you throw millions and millions of eyeballs at a game which is bad, and then it's really hard to come back from so
que aparece essas putaria toda aqui, mano.
sort of amount of players saying that your game is bad. But if you're like an indie dev and like 10,000, 50,000, whatever amount of people play your game, and they're like, it could be better. Maybe it's mixed. Maybe it's mostly positive or whatever. Maybe it's overwhelmingly negative. Like you can absolutely come back from that, because like the whole idea is that like 1.0 is supposed to be more successful, like magnitudes more successful than your early access. So therefore, like the majority of your players should come from 1.0 and afterwards. And then that should basically even out all the reviews. And then, if you get 10,000 bad reviews, what does that matter if over a few years you make the game amazing and then at 1.0 you get a million amazing reviews? It's just like a drop in the pond. So I think like the ratios, unless you have a very, very big following and like a lot of hype, like unless you're like that, what was that, like the day before game?
Yep.
Like unless you're that sort of like level of success, like I think you can always come back from it.
Gotcha. So yeah, what I'm hearing there is there's also potential risk, which is your demo or your whatever, the first thing you launch on early access is amazing and it creates so much hype that suddenly you're kind of at a loss because you can't quite fulfill that hype with a full game. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's sort of a great problem to have though. Like selling too many copies at your early access launch. Like I think every developer would love to have that problem. I like Valheim, I guess would be a perfect example of that. Like it launched to early access and like just the first iteration of the game got tremendous success. And now they've kept developing the game for several years. I think they're planning a 1.0 next year. And like it's probably already sold 90% of all the copies it will ever sell in its entire lifetime. Like it's reached the pool of players, it did its job. I'm sure the game is, you know, a lot better than it was before. It's like they got the success, like it was done. And like I don't think it would have been that successful if it sucked. So it's sort of like if you sell a bunch of copies, usually your game's pretty good in some sort of way. Or you just had a killer marketing campaign, which I don't think it's sort of just like, it's nothing to worry about in my mind in that sense. But you also get 2 releases. Like if you get an early access release, you literally just have 2 releases. Like the 1.0 release on Steam from an early access game, it's not any different than a normal 1.0 release. Like I've asked the Steam reps myself in person and I said like, is there any technical differences? Like surely if an early access gets an early access launch and then they launch into 1.0, like do they just simply get 2 launches? Like obviously there's some subtle differences in being in like the new and trending and sort of featured sections, but as terms of like the actual exposure and impressions and how Steam promotes your game across the Steam store, it's exactly identical to a game just releasing straight into 1.0 with no early access. So you really do have 2 chances, like 2 100% shots at sort of being successful, which again is another big thing. Yeah.
Okay, so what about wish lists? Does early access help wish lists?
Yeah, like absolutely can be. Like it's sort of like the better your game is, and the bigger the promise at the end, the more wish lists. Like we launched Lens Island with 200,000 wish lists, I think. Now we have around 400,000. So basically just like, well, we doubled our wish list. So that's sort of the straightforward impact that early access had for us. It's like we basically now get to recreate our launch all over again, but just with like double the amount of bullets loaded in the gun ready to go.
Gotcha.
And now the game is like 10 times the game that it was. So if it's done properly, if you really treat it seriously, it can just be like the perfect launch pad for a game that would be otherwise impossible to make. But with the caveat, like you really do have to do it properly. It's a lot of work, a lot of effort. It's a tightrope, but it's definitely possible and definitely can lead to some like really good outcomes.
So one of the ways that is common right now to get wish lists is to launch a demo during Next Fest, right?
Yeah.
There's a Next Fest coming up in October, and I think there's another one in February, I believe. And so the strategy is launch a demo at the Next Fest that is prior to your 1.0 launch.
Okay.
And it hopefully brings in hundreds of thousands of wish lists if you've got a good demo, right? Have you launched a demo? Are you planning to launch a demo, or is early access, does it sort of kill that for you?
So we pretty much did that exact same formula. So we launched with an Next Fest demo, and we're like sort of like the 3rd most downloaded demo of that Next Fest. So we're pretty high up on the list, and we stayed there for the whole Next Fest. And that's what got me from like 10,000 wish lists to 200,000 really. I think like the first day of the Next Fest it was like 25,000 wish lists in a day. And for me, like that was still the biggest moment of sort of like satisfaction and success I've felt since doing the entire game. Even like through the early access launch and everything, like that moment was like when I officially went from just some little kid being like, oh, maybe I'll make this game, maybe it'll be successful, I don't know, like a few thousand people might buy it. Like, oh shit, like this is a game. like people are going to buy this, and I've really got a shot here at like big success.
Yeah,
And that was huge for us. But yeah, we did that exact same formula. We sort of did it like before it was cool, when like the Next Fest was still in its first sort of iteration. So it was a lot less competitive and a little bit different sort of 3 or 4 years ago. I think it was like 4 years ago or something, the Next Fest we did, maybe longer. It's a bit of a different beast now. Like it's a lot more competitive. But at the same time, like the good games rise to the top, whether you have a big marketing budget for Next Fests or not. But I guess I got lucky. I also could use my YouTube channel to just like throw a bunch of eyeballs at our demo straight away. So harnessing our fan, like the fan base from YouTube for the Next Fest definitely helped, because I could sort of hit the launch button on the demo, and then like the first minute that Next Fest opened, I was like live streaming the game, and I was like, everybody, it's free to download, and then I just got like a couple thousand like down installs like instantly, and that got us towards the list, and then it sort of snowballs from there. So
I love that.
Yeah.
So this is so great. The reason I do this podcast, the secret reason, is so that I get free consultation from geniuses. So thank you, thank you very much. This is helpful. I'm being a little tongue in cheek there, but the thing is that I want to know why you. So what I've been told by publishers and also friends is to launch at the Next Fest prior to your 1.0 launch. Now I've got one buddy who he's killing it. He's got like 200,000 plus wish lists. However, he launched at the Next Fest. He just launched at one of the Next Fests, and he didn't really think about when he was going to do a 1.0 launch. And so it might be a year or two from now before he even launches, which is counter to the strategy I've heard, which is hit the Next Fest prior to your 1.0 launch. So as close as you can. Do you think there's credence to that piece of advice?
Yeah, like with anything, like striking while the iron is hot, definitely amplifies like the actual conversion. So it's like, you know, if you convert people a week or a month after they wishlist a game, there will be more conversions than a year, 2 years. So that is like the one caveat with early access, is like the pool of wish lists that you have. If it is a long early access phase, I would consider our one relatively long or medium. We'll be in early access it'll basically be like exactly 3 years. So those 400,000 wish lists at face value may not be
As tirar as torres, na verdade, fazer só
200,000 wish lists gained over a Next Fest that could convert like a couple of months later.
As torres vão ser
Like the
objeto
difference is not
separado,
so
eu
big
acho.
that you don't wait. Like it's a way to amplify what you have, but also like having a good game is a way to amplify what you have. Just having a good marketing strategy is like, there's a million other things you can do. Having the right, sort of price to launch with, like there's so many things that get people through the door as far as converting, that I would say like a lot more important than just simply like someone that may have like slightly-ish forgotten about your game. Like if they're interested at one point, they're probably still interested.
Yeah.
But there's things like, localizing your store page in multiple languages, and like maybe having like Steam Deck support or console support, and like or controller support. Other stuff like that that can get you a lot more players, and can convert a lot more than just simply trying to adhere to some sort of rule of time frames.
Yeah.
So it's like, I wouldn't use it as a hard and fast rule, but like it definitely affects it to a degree.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So if you had to pick one, would you pick 400,000 wish lists over the course of 3 years or 2 years or whatever you said? Or would you pick 200,000 wish lists 2 months before launch? Which one would you pick?
Well, like I guess it depends. So like the absolute version of that question, in which the rest of the game doesn't exist, I'd maybe pick 200,000, but at the same sense, practically 400,000 means that you have developed the game for longer, which means the game is probably like more ready to market. Like you've actually developed it alongside a player base, and it's had more time to mature. It's probably a better game. And then in that case, just having a better game is, I would pick above any other metric. Like I don't care about what the marketing metric is. I would rather have a killer perfect game with 0 wish lists than have an okay average game with 500,000 wish lists. I just don't care about wish lists. And that is like every other developer that I've talked to with games a lot more successful than mine, everyone agrees. It's pretty unanimous. It's just like the game is the thing that matters. Like all the marketing is generally a multiplier. It's like if you have success, if you are going to sell 1,000 copies, you do some killer marketing, like maybe that can do it a ×2 on your 1,000 copies or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you have a killer game, like that adds to the pool of copies before the multiplier. So if you've got like a really, really amazing game, maybe you can sell 100,000 copies on its own. And then with some killer marketing, you do a ×2. And guess what? Like that ×2 marketing just made you 100,000 copies extra rather than 1,000 copies extra. So they both need to be done in tandem with each other. However, like I don't get too caught up in the numbers. I use like wish lists and everything. It's more of like an indication as far as like the trends and like how people are sort of responding to and liking the game in its current state. I see it less as some sort of absolute value that like predicts the success accurately. It's more about like the game itself, I think, is the best indicator of future success.
Brilliant. So right now, do you agree? First question is, do you agree that the indie game industry is struggling right now?
Oh, I would say no. I don't agree.
Okay. See, Gavin, who made Choo Choo Charles, he agrees with you. He's said as much as well, that it's like it's not struggling. What's struggling is publishers and AAA.
Yeah, I agree.
So do you agree? Next question is then, do you agree that a good game can get buried and not see
Botei na versão errada.
any eyes on it on Steam just because they didn't market it well?
Nossa, não acredito.
Or do you think no, if it truly is a good game, it's just going to rise to the top?
I think like it really depends on your definition of good. I think there's a lot of AA and AAA games that are making good games, and good as a definition of like solid games. Like technically, if you look at a whiteboard and you look at the feature lists, you're like, yep, it's got the bones there. Like it's got everything it needs to be a good game. But then a lot of them are quite uninspired, not necessarily groundbreaking. They don't have unique hooks. Like they don't actually have some sort of like value proposition outside of the fact of like, this is a solid gameplay experience. And it's like, people don't want solid gameplay experiences. They want like good. They want a game that provides them something they haven't been provided with before. So I think in general, like AA and AAA are taking less and less risks. And it's sort of like a self-perpetuating cycle where it's like, because the industry for that sector has been a little bit more cutthroat, big studios are trying to do like take less risks. So they're making more like watered down, mundane, sort of just like solid games. And solid games like used to sort of cut it when there was 100 games launching every year. But now there's like 30,000 games launching every year. And like that doesn't matter. Like your solid, just standard run-of-the-mill game doesn't really like maybe before, just due to the fact there were such little games, it could have had a chance for sort of mediocre success, but now less so. But I just really think that like those games in general were never going to be truly successful. They were almost just like filling a void in like media consumption, where it's like, no, I've got nothing else to do. I'll just play this average game. And I think like indies and just like, you know, people just out on their own, they don't have like 100 mouths to feed of like a big studio. They don't have necessarily like shareholders and like this whole structure imposing all of this like risk. So they take more risk and they choose more unique visions. They sort of like break the boundaries a little bit and create just more games with hooks. Like indies are just better at creating games with stronger hooks across the board.
Because so they're low risk.
Exactly. And it's like they don't even care about the risk. It's like if you just like quit your job at McDonald's to like make a game, it's like, what's the risk to you? Like you go back to McDonald's. So like you try anything you can to just like make the craziest, most amazing game possible. But like if you're heading up a large studio, the risk of like a game failing is like, I'm going to ruin like hundreds of lives. Like I am going to cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. Like it is just like exponentially greater the risk. So like I think it's all about just like risk in the industry and what larger studios define as risk. I just think like that mentality is what is failing. It's more just like game design companies and game design culture, and game design as an art. I would say like that is the mechanism that sort of is bad and failing to a degree at the moment in some studios. And that's not really a mechanism that exists inside of indies for the most part. So,
okay.
Yeah.
That's
Nem sei nem
really
porque tá morrendo, velho. Não faz
seriously,
sentido.
and because I'm part of the publisher world,
demorando pra
'cause,
caralho.
you know, all of my games get published.
Não sei porque trava tanto.
I see how the sausage is made, and I experience the corporate. It's like just a mess of communication sometimes, and then you've got like C-level people, and you've got shareholders who want changes in the game on the indie side, right? So all of that corporate nonsense funnels down to the indies that they're publishing, and suddenly you're in a situation where you've got a watered down vision of an indie game, which is like the worst possible thing.
Yeah.
Because an indie game's not going to make $100 million most likely, or 50 million, you know? And so you've got this game where it's watered down, and so it's not going to compete. It's not going to be able to compete with the other indie games that are not watered down, because those games were willing or able to take risk because they didn't have the corporate structure, right? Yeah. So what I've discovered this year is that getting a publisher is a great thing if you need the money. But right now, in particular, getting a publisher means that you're probably going to get bogged down with corporate nonsense that will then water down your vision, thus in creating more risk for your game's launch. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, like
cool.
Publishers are like that glue between the AAA, AA, and the indie scene. Like they're that sort of like tear in the middle, and sometimes it can really leak down and affect. And that just like all depends on the publisher, right? Or like sometimes it's not even publisher. Sometimes it might even just be. There's also marketing firms that do sort of royalty-based stuff, and then you also just get investors and stuff, and more like traditional business sort of model. But either way, it's like when there's a larger business imposing their
Vou definir os tamanhos aqui, cara.
onto an indie, then it's like
Vai ser o
cool.
jeito.
Like you're like you're being sort of controlled by that sort of scene and by those decisions,
Deus.
and it absolutely
tá.
will affect the
Legal.
indie. And that just comes down to like
Eita, foda,
yeah, like publishers are.
Eu achei que tava grande.
Really
Eu achei que tava grande.
publishers. However, there are amazing publishers out there. Like I have a lot of friends that have work with publishers, and you know the right ones. Like they have nothing but amazing things to say about them. But there's also a lot of horror stories, right? So
There are.
yeah.
And you know, for me, I've found that some of the, maybe I'm trying to think here, two really crucial things. It might just be one, but two really crucial things here about picking a publisher is, number one, if the publisher is a big time publisher, that could be a huge red flag, because the big time publishers are funded by these huger companies, like much bigger companies. And so again, that corporate structure funnels down into your project and it becomes a freaking nightmare. That's one side of it. The second side is, or second point I'd like to say is that just because a publisher is offering you $1 million in funding, that I would rather get offered $100,000 in funding at a really low royalty fee,
Right.
because as opposed to $1 million at a higher, like a 50-50 split. And the reason why is because with $100,000, you're not really going to be controlled that much, because it's low risk for the publisher. That's pennies to a publisher. But the moment you go up to like $1 million in funding, or maybe $500,000 in funding, suddenly that publisher is going to be much, much more involved in your project. And so all those beautiful hooks that you've got, all those idiosyncrasies that make your game strange and unique, they might be offensive to a publisher. Or not offensive, but it might scare the publisher, right? Because they're investing all this money. So my sort of advice to people listening now, if they do want to get a publisher, and based on what you've said as well, is that steer clear or be very vigilant about publishers who are throwing around big lump sums of cash, because you're going to become kind of their slave. and you don't want that. Not with an indie title, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like publishers in general, they feel like the delta between what is possible for you to make on your own and then what is the ceiling of your potential success with that thing that you could potentially make. So it's like if for example, like when I had started making Lens Island and got traction by myself, had a few 100,000 wish lists, the game was fun and I was like, I think I have the potential to finish this game. I had an idea of what our future success could be. Like I could sort of extrapolate where I was now to like, okay, the future version of Lens Island released could sell 500,000 copies. Like it could do like really well in certain ways. And like that's what I'm playing with right now. Like my decision making isn't this game that hasn't been built yet that's earned $0. My decision making is around like a game and an IP that's worth millions and millions of dollars. Because like the future version of the released product is what actually matters here. So and then it's like, can I get to that by myself? And then if I can't get to it, if I could get to like 50% of that vision by myself, then what does that future projection like sort of look like? Am I okay with that? If I'm not okay with it, would it be better to get a publisher to get to that top projection, but then have to minus what the publisher is going to take? And it's sort of like what you think like your potential for success is on as an individual or as a team versus like the potential success. And if you're okay, like it's sort of like a sliding scale, right? And like sometimes if you're lucky, if you have a Kickstarter, if you have sort of like alternate sort of income streams, you can go a lot further, like completely on your own without a publisher. So you can just like, that delta's a lot smaller. But if you're trying to make a really big game with a big team and you have nothing to back you, then it's like, you basically don't know that game. You know, like you're giving a development team and an idea to a publisher, and you're getting a little cut out of that dream game. Because guess what? Like you don't have a game studio built that has the money to back this. So like that's just not how the real world works. So it's all about like the assessment on that delta is like the big thing. Because like I was approached by a lot of big publishers, you know, like publishers like 505 Games, like ones that were like, oh shit, like these make some of the biggest games in the world that like I've played, and now they want to like own my game or publish it. But you just gotta like take those rose-colored glasses off. It's like the decision you're making, so that like it doesn't matter. Like you don't base it off what your current state is. You base it on what the future state of the successful released product is. Like that's what you base your decision making on. So,
well, you know, to sort of wrap up this, and then I want to get into the heart attack you had.
Cara, eu quero que fale muito sobre o ataque do coração que o cara teve.
How so many game developers right now, they might have a fearful predisposition. Like they're just like, for me personally, I'll admit that most of my life I've been someone who's very risk averse, and I know that people listening probably don't believe that because I started my own game studio, but I've always approached every decision with like, well, how do I have enough money in savings, and how do I survive for the next 5 years if nothing comes of this game, you know? And so I'm always sort of storing up for like a hurricane or a really bad season. You seem to be somebody who's just really confident in what you're making, and you're going to put everything into that and not worry about the future. Is that true?
Yeah, like to a degree. I think it describes me, but like I definitely, like I stress, I'm very anxious. Like I'm a very organized, like forward planning sort of person, but at the same time I am confident in my own ability and I do take risks. One big thing I think is just like a practical difference though. It's like I don't have a family. I think just having a family and having a kids is just like a fundamental difference in like being risk adverse. And it's like, and I think it quite literally is like, if you have a studio and there's 20 people on your payroll, or if you're one person with a family, they're probably pretty comparable. Like you're probably in similar sort of mental situations as far as like the risk profile. Because like, like I've had the time, we've been at points where I've had like, I think 12 or 13 people on like the payroll for Flow Studio. And then, like I definitely had some like different sort of risk taking, different decision making at that point. Now we're sitting around like 5 people. And it's a bit different. I do think family really matters and like the scale of the company matters. However, like, I really, really, truly believe in just like I'm a very motivated person, and the thing that motivates me the most is just like how far like the will of a person will get you. Like I just think it's like the biggest, most important thing in life in general. It's just like willpower. It's just like doing the thing that you're thinking about. I think that's like the most special secret sauce to life. And I have a lot of confidence in just willpower. Like I have a lot of confidence in what someone can do if they actually do the thing that's in their mind, like the thing they tell themselves that they want to do. If you really put 100% into that thing, like I think it is just extraordinary the results that can come from that. Yeah. And I think over my life, I've somewhat proven that to myself, that is like a system that I can be confident in. Yeah. So I am confident in it. Because for me, it's just like the point of life is just to really do what I want to do. So that to me is worth more than anything else. And sometimes they're worth more than like putting my life at risk, because it's just like, even if I run my body into the ground, I'm fine with that, because it's like, for me, this is everything. Like the culmination of my life is exploring my passion and exploring my motivations and giving my life meaning through those ways. So therefore, like, I don't really care if something negative was to happen to me. Like if I was to die because I was too motivated and too passionate and working too hard, then it's like, okay, I'm okay with that. Like at the end of the day, like that's just that was me living my life the way that was through my lens worth living. Sure. So yeah.
Sure. You know, and that's so funny you talk about family, because for me, I can't think that way. You know, it's like I can't run my body into the ground because my children want to jump with me on the trampoline at 5:30 p.m. You know, my wife needs me as well. So I have 3 kids now. And so, you know, for me now, I have to be like, how much can I work? How beautiful can I make this game? How amazing can I make this game without it affecting my family? Yeah. You know, and there are seasons, like right now I'm in a season, and me and my wife, we have to discuss this. You know, we sit down and we talk about, okay, you know, this quarter is going to be rough. I'm going to have to work late nights, and I'm going to have to get up early, and I'm going to be kind of stressed out even in the evenings. And so we have to plan for that and budget emotionally for that. Whereas if people are listening right now and you're in your 20s, or maybe you don't want a family, then sure, you know, go for it, you know, go nuts. But let's talk about that. You did take that risk, and your body took a toll. Can you give me the story there about what happened?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying, just like quickly adding on to what you said, like I do believe that is like working hard or effectively is a skill, and it's something like I don't sort of run myself into the ground these days in the same way that I used to. I have like my fitness and eating and everything is like a massive priority. I'm like a much healthier, different person that I used to be, but I still work just as effectively because like I found ways to do it in a more sustainable way. So for me, it's all about like effectiveness of what I'm doing. Whereas when I was more of a novice, it was all about hours. It was just like I just keep throwing my body at the wall, and that was the way that I filled the gap in skill, right? Because like I was fresh out of university, just started working on this project. It's the first game I've ever made. Like I never made a game before Lens Island that was released in any way, and like clearly I was just like a novice game developer. I had a huge gap in knowledge, and the only way that I could fill that was like, cool, so I'm just going to work and just sort of do nothing else. Like I'm just going to only work and just fill it up with hours, and sort of like that whole like 10,000 hours to become a professional. It's like, cool, let's speed run those 10,000 hours and just like smack them all out, and at the same time make a game that's going to propel my life forward. So the inevitable outcome of like really giving my all was that like, yeah, like over like a course of a couple years, all of like the body maintenance, all of the mental maintenance just sort of degraded and degraded and degraded. Like I just like lost weight over like I'm naturally like a pretty athletic sort of skinny guy. And I just like lost more and more weight to where I was like the lightest I'd ever been by far in my life at one point. I was like pale. I was clearly not getting like basic vitamins. I was like not eating good food. I was eating junk food and eating just very little because I was trying to have as few meals as possible. I was trying to just make everything in my life was like efficiency based on time. It was like, how can I maximize the amount of time that I'm at the computer and working? My relationship took a toll, like my mental health took a toll, like everything just like kept sliding downhill. And I sort of like was like, I understood that I was sort of okay with it. and it just was like necessary, because it's like my mindset at the time that I was sort of in the early stages making Lens Island, it was like, this is my future. Like nothing else exists for me. I've always had the mentality where it's like, if I have a really good idea late at night, I would just like wake up, go on my computer and stay up all night to do the idea. Because for me, it's just like what's the sort of the value proposition is like, okay, so I'm tired the next day, and the next day is like a little bit ruined, but then I don't get some sort of action on this amazing idea, versus it's just, I would much rather have this idea come to life and I take some sort of like little negative sort of like impact. So then like that scaled up over years and years. It's like all of these micro decisions where you just like, your body and your mental health is just taking all these hits. And it got to the point where it's like, I really never realized that, I think this is ultimately like the big mistake. Like I really did not realize that mental health could cross over into physical health so drastically. Like I just did not think that was possible. I was like, I can meditate and willpower away my sorrows and I'll be fine, sort of thing. And it just like doesn't work like that. Combined with the fact that I was very physically unhealthy at the time, it just sort of created a scenario where like my body was so adapted to stress and like high stress that like my resting heart rate was just got higher and higher and higher. I started getting so much like arrhythmia and just like irregular heartbeats and just all of these symptoms of just really high level chronic stress just became like normal life for me, and I started to accept them. But yeah, then it got to the point where it was basically, like one night I just had such like sort of like arrhythmia, and my heart was sort of going all over the place. And this was a night that I was trying to spend with friends. I was like, here's the one night to take my mind off things. We're a couple months out from launch, and I was like, okay, I've just been grinding. I need some sort of quick little relief. So I had some friends over, had a couple drinks, and I think it was just the combination of just sort of like alcohol and just me being so unbelievably stressed and not really doing anything about it. It clearly just like bottled up to a point where like I just got like I've had sort of like high anxiety, and I'll get like acute little panic attacks over my whole life over various things, and they're fine. It's like and then I'll get over it. 30 seconds later, I'm back to normal. But then this was a whole different beast. Like this was like I sort of was just like in the toilet washing my hands, and then I was just like, whoa, like my vision's getting blurry, and my heart's beating out of my chest. And then it's got to the point where like my whole body just felt like it was just literally shutting down. Like I was like, felt my pulse, and my heart was just going like, it was like, it was going so fast. I was like, okay, my body cannot keep my heart beating this fast for very long before something really bad's going to happen.
Wow.
And I started like losing my vision. And I was thinking like, oh, okay, like maybe this is like a really bad panic attack. Like, I don't know. And then it just got to the point where my body was just in so much discomfort and pain that I was like, oh, okay, like this is actually like a next level. Like, and I called my now wife, Steph, to like call an ambulance. And then, ambulance comes, and then I'm sort of like in and out of consciousness. And they put me in the ambulance, and then they do this thing called like the Volsva maneuver, where it's like they sort of flip you onto your back and get you like below as hard as you can into like this stick. And then they sort of quickly flip you forwards. And it's basically like a maneuver to try to like reset your heart. So like I had like a really bad like cardiac arrhythmia. So I was like watching on like the heart rate machine that it was like 200 plus, and then it would just like dive to just like 20 beats a minute. And I'll just like go like this and just start to like pass out. And then that would like flip me up, and then my heart rate would like spike back to 200. And yeah, it was sort of like around an hour or so of me just like, it's crazy. This ambulance sort of like battling my heart, and it quite literally felt like to me like every time I was sort of about to pass out, it would just felt like the movies. Like I was just watching my heart rates go doot, 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 like exactly like they do in the movies. And I just thought, okay, here it is. Like it's it. Like I'm dying. This is it. And then, and then they would sort of flip me up. And then it got to a point where like it was getting worse and worse. And then they shut the doors and start like racing to the hospital. And like, now the ambulance people start like panic a lot more. And I'm starting to get a bit more concerned. and they like rip off my shirt, and then they basically hook up all of like the electrodes and stuff to me, and then they start having to like it's like not defibrillating, but it's like a different version of defibrillating to like reset your heart rather than I guess like they're basically just like shocking me over and over. And I was sort of like stuck in this loop where I was sort of basically just dying and my heart was stopping, and they kept having to shock me to sort of like trying to get it back onto rhythm. And yeah, like when they closed like the ambulance doors, like I said goodbye to Steph, and like I really like thought like that was it, you know, like I thought, fuck it. It's hard to talk about, but like you know, just like the moment of like saying goodbye to like your loved one, be like, see you, Steph. And I just had the thought in my mind, like, I think this is probably the last time I'll like say goodbye to her. And
Damn, boy. O cara passou mal aí, ó.
I just realized I literally haven't told this story since we did our documentary, so it's pretty difficult to talk about because I don't really talk about that often.
Yeah.
But
Que foda, mano.
But yeah, basically several hours this whole ordeal.
Before evening.
I sort of had like this severe cardiac
Meu Deus do céu.
arrhythmia.
Corrige isso aqui, Thomas Rush. Meu Deus do céu.
Like that. And I sort of put in the hospital for like a day or two under all this like surveillance and stuff, and all these heart rate machines and everything. There was a team of like a dozen doctors around me when I got to the hospital, and they basically like put me on all this medication and all this stuff because my heart for then like a long time after that had like really severe sort of arrhythmia throughout the day. And it sort of slowly got better over time, but like I could barely sort of like see straight and walk and move the next day. Like it was like it completely just floored me, that experience. And I think it really put into perspective for me, like, just like the perspective of quite literally being like, okay, this is it, like 100% ready to die.
Yeah.
It put in perspective for me, I guess, two things, and it was really like, I'm happy with the choices, and I'm happy with what I did. Like I'm confident in the person that I am. I'm confident that like, you know, Julian would just, if Julian had the same life over and over and over, he just would have made this decision every time. And I'm okay with that because Julian's just doing what Julian wants to do. And then at the same time, it's like, okay, how can we keep this mentality? How can I give myself to what I want to do in life 100%, but then have longevity at the same time, have sustainability within that environment.
Ele sobreviveu aqui
I guess ever since then, that was like 3 or 4 years, probably like 4 years ago now, I've sort of just been on like this journey to be like, okay, how can I really make sure stress management and my physical health and my mental health is a priority, and it's like a non-negotiable, you know, going for a run, working out, eating healthy, having time with my wife, like meditating, like being able to like talk about my problems. All these things are now like cornerstones of my life that I can't give up. Like they're foundations that are like
Boa tarde.
part of the day where it's like
Nossos parabéns sim, Rodrigo. Parabéns pra tu, meu querido. Seja feliz, viu? Aproveite sua sexta-feira e vai comer uma pizza à noite.
I've had to sort of slowly build up this sort of foundation of good health and a good mental health over time.
Yeah.
But it definitely took like a severe learning experience to really work out just how bad it can get, because I guess when you really give your all to something, it's like there's nothing left. Like once you've given your all, you realize that like there's nothing left in the tank, and you really start to sort of realize
melhor seria fazer o nave mesh já.
To just like have nothing left, no energy, no health, no nothing, and like my body just shut down. Like
Fechou, Rodrigo. Obrigado, viu?
They just can't do it any longer.
Well, man, that's just, dude, that's so wild. And I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you were with friends, dude. Man, imagine if you were working on your game and you were alone.
Yeah, yeah. Like that was like a real fear of mine for like a year or two afterwards. Was just like I was too scared to sort of go for a run or hike or anything because I was just so scared about just getting a heart attack. It took a while to build up that confidence, and now it's like I ran a half marathon the other day just because I just sort of felt like it, and I felt great, and like I couldn't dream about doing that, you know, before. Like I'd run a kilometer and be like, and like on the ground, and so like it quite literally just changed my life for the better, game design, as a weird little symptom that I did not expect.
Exactly.
I'm very happy to say that like I'm a very much a healthier, happier, sort of better person now, and I'm very, very glad that experience happened. For me, like experiencing the full spectrum of life is I think like for me like necessary and an important part of life to actually understand what the real good parts are like and what the real bad parts are like. So the silver lining for me is being able to sort of understand that full spectrum. Really puts into perspective like the little things throughout the day that feel big at the time, when you go, they're nothing. Like that's fine. I'll get over it.
Man, I totally agree. I was just talking to my wife about this because this summer, like I've said, and I'll probably do a video about what exactly this summer, what happened, but for my studio. But I was talking to my wife about this and just how grateful I am for the hell that this summer was, because I'm like Thomas Brush 2.0 now, you know, like I've upgraded. And for you, it's like, it sounds like you don't really have any regrets about how you did things because you're just better for it now, you know?
Definitely.
Sort of to wrap this conversation up here, I wanted to ask you, you've given us the solution for game developers listening now who might be overworked and burnt out. And the solution is non-negotiable exercise, non-negotiable diet, and meditation, and all of that. What do you think is inherently stressful about game dev?
Well, I think the inherently stressful part is really just building a thing without a blueprint. It's like whenever you're trying to make something and you don't know exactly what it is you're trying to make or exactly how to make it, whatever judgments you make will always be wrong. So like the really difficult part about game design, and this is also applies to like making movies and other forms of media, but sometimes it can be less so because they're at some points less technical. But it's very, very difficult to estimate time, money, just to estimate anything. Like,
Eu acho que já tá bom o suficiente isso aqui, tá? Acho que a gente já fez bastante coisa por hoje. Eu obviamente tenho que entrar num fluxo um pouquinho melhor. Daqui a pouco eu tenho que lavar a roupa. Só que eu tenho que sair de casa pra isso. E... é isso aí, deixa eu até fechar isso aqui. Eu vou fechar a live por aqui. Uns 47 minutinhos aí. Eu provavelmente vou voltar agora só quando for pra gravar o Satisfactory. Beleza? Valeu por quem acompanhou, por quem apareceu. Até mais tarde!